Hello and welcome to Bolshevik Bistro. My name is Eugene, coming to you from Swamp to Stagnant Swamp, live on YouTube. Check us out on easternmartians.com and donate to us if you want to help out our show on Patreon. Today is a very interesting topic. We're talking about oppression, and we're talking to a good buddy of mine from Discord. We've been hanging out a lot. He just messaged me, yo, there is a topic I want to talk about. Let's do it. And I'm like, come on, why not? Let's do this. And his name is Dooboys. Hello, Dooboys.
Hi, you can refer to me as Dooboys or Dubois. Either one works. I'd also
Is it really Dubois?
Yeah, so Dubois it's a joke, referencing to like when I started using the name online of Dubois. People like my friends would mispronounce it purposely to joke, mispronouncing it as Dooboys. That's the joke.
Okay, like that's the joke.
I would also like to give a shout out to Rispy. Rispy, you know who you are. I'm shouting you out. This is it. Yeah. Other than that, coming from Washington State, America, Burgerland. I'm your typical college undergrad, speaking my mind about political opinions I have.
Amazing. And we have been talking a lot about a lot of different stuff on Discord. I really love Discord. You are known on our Discord as person who actually read Germany Tomorrow. And to be honest, I love it because the way you talk, like, to be 100% honest with you and with the people, when you're in a chat, I always feel threatened, like, because you sit around being, just talking randomly about stuff, playing around, but you always sound as if you're like purposefully being angry at people, purposely being hateful.
I mean, it's just the blunt style of my rhetoric. I'm really forthcoming.
Yeah. Exactly. And the way you talk about these things, like, the only way to control the voice for you people out there is to mention that he is the guy who read Germany Tomorrow, and he knows that actually,
my shame.
Actually, the Strasser brothers were not anti-Semitic. Clever.
Yeah, hey, speaking of which, did you hear about? I actually heard about this today. I heard about it before, but I heard about what it's actually about. Did you hear about Trump? He declared the embassy, the capital of Israel, to be Jerusalem, and he said he's going to move the U.S. embassy there.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I remember that. I've seen some news piece about that, and I remember there was a person who was like an activist, like a two-state solution, pro-Palestinian activist in Israel, and she was standing there and like pointing to a building in Jerusalem, saying, "Look, this is a building that belongs to American government. It has been standing there since like fucking day one. It's there. It's like some sort of diplomatic mission. It's not an embassy, but it is basically a diplomatic mission building." And they remember how they were saying, "Oh, it's really complicated to move embassy, you have to set up security, blah blah blah, it costs a lot of money." She said the only thing that it has to make this an embassy is a fucking sign. So all of this
they're just gonna move to the building that's already there.
Yeah, that's already there. That already has all the fucking security.
Oh, that's really spooky, because that sounds like the American government, if it's been there since day one, that means they were planning for the annexation of Palestine as time goes on. That's really depressing.
No, it's rather that she wanted to point out that all of this talk about like, no, where is the embassy, blah blah blah, it's more of a symbolic sign, rather than anything else. So it's like literally just playing around with press.
There's no functional reason for it. It's power posturing.
Exactly. It's just power posturing. It has been this since day one. Yeah, it's like
it's instigating. It's essentially instigating further Israeli settlement.
Yeah, more or less. Like, it's really just and it really simplifies the conflict, like, and the problems that exist in Palestine and Israel. Like, it's deeper than, oh, who controls this place? Who's signed with America? Check out tomorrow on our 24-hour news.
There's no ambiguity about which side America is taking.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's really silly. It's really silly. So I don't even like. I remember seeing that and I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't fucking care.
I personally find it pretty fucking disgusting, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's instigating further settling by the Israeli state and further annexation of Palestinian land. It's like you move the embassy to Israel. You recognize that East Jerusalem is Israeli land, even though literally zero international legal institutions have done so. International law and the international community, quote unquote, has condemned the shit out of Israel for this, for the War of '67. Like, it's instigating. It's further trying to provoke Israel. It's like giving them the go ahead. Yeah, just fucking take more Palestinian land. Go ahead, dude.
Exactly. It's really,
and that's why it's disgusting.
I do understand that. I just I don't really like those symbolic acts. I think I really underplay them because I just find it not as important as the legitimate policy. Like Israel is a very, very interesting place. It's a very interesting political theater, and I believe almost all sides in this discussion are guilty of underplaying what is going on there.
Are you a radical centrist? Are you a both-sider?
I'm not. I'm just saying that I'm not both-sider. I'm just saying that if you listen to only one side of the conflict, it seems like I'm not saying, oh, I'm a radical centrist. I'm saying I'm a person who, for example, I exist in the political spectrum of the United States, and I dislike Democratic Party and Republican Party, and dislike people who support either Democrats or Republicans for thinking those are the only two legitimate choices.
But the difference is that there are no institutionalized choices in this particular question, other than the institutions of Israel and of Palestine. You're free to choose. You don't have to. You're not socially conditioned. I think that's a false equivalency. It's a bad analogy.
Yeah, but what I mean by this is that, when you listen to, for example, communists, right? Yeah. Bless you. They're all shouting oh, Israelis are literal fucking fascists. Look at this, look at that, and there are no. I understand where they're coming from, but a lot of the claims that are being said by critics of Israel on the radical left are really they're correct, but they're factually correct, But if you look at the data that they're providing, it's most often really empty. It's people don't realize that that the conflict in Israel is literally about a minority political power that appeals to a small that appeals to the majority with scare tactics, and the whole thing would be really, really okay, if the conflict was de-escalated. It's in my opinion, the Israeli conflict is really fucking easy. And the only problem is imperialism, American imperialism, that keeps it all together, and scare tactics that the right wing uses. Literally,
local Belarusian man solves the Middle East.
No. I say it is easy, but on the other hand, it is impossible to solve in current conditions because America exists. This is the old joke about America exists. Okay. Oh shit!
Yeah, that's but you can't just say it's America, just get rid of America, it'd be solvable. What do you do after America's gone? That's what the point of the solution is.
Yeah.
That's why people,
I don't understand
that's why people frame it in the number of states solutions, then they don't frame it in we gotta destroy America. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I do understand it.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, it's midnight. We have we are too far from our today's topic that we really came here to talk about.
Well, you could actually tie it back because
we can
clearly
Palestinian, yeah, and the oppression is really interesting. It's really weird if you look at the West Bank, a territory that is for the most part Zone A and Zone B, are literally occupied, and Zone C is technically a de facto Palestinian state, right?
Yeah.
But they exist. If you look at the map, have you seen the map of the settlements?
Oh no, I haven't actually seen the map itself. All I know is that
Oh my god.
settlements.
Just imagine, like, there's this giant block, of land, West Bank.
Yeah, I feel like
And
I'm Googling. I feel like I'm going to get depressed by this.
look at the zoning of the region. Like, Zone A is a zone of a complete control of Israel. This is where the settlements are,
Yes.
legal settlements. This is what they have been like agreeing on, with Oslo Accords.
Yeah.
Bless you, all of that stuff. Like, this is the zone where Israel has the settlements. This is
Oh my
where
god!
they
Yeah,
have-
I'm looking at the map of it, of the Palestinian Authority and the walls and fences. That's pretty disgusting.
Yeah. So basically, this is the Zone A,
Oh, and the
complete control of
settlements,
Israeli
Jesus.
government. Then we have Zone B. It's technically Palestinian land that has Israeli police. It is done as a counter-terrorist like measure, blah blah blah. Literally disgusting. Like, it's a giant fucking chunk of land that shouldn't be controlled by Israel, but is. A lot of illegal settlements are there. They pop up occasionally, and it is done through silent support of the conservative government that is in charge of Israel for a very long time.
Yeah.
Fucking Likud, get out of my fucking Knesset read.
Yeah, it looks like the areas are just encroachments of the Israeli state on the already small Palestinian territory.
Yeah, and then you have Zone C, which is a full Palestinian control, which is literally fucking dots on the map. It's like literally this city, that city, and they're all scattered all around. And
I think it's actually that the dots and like spots are the Israeli encroaching, like the.
But the problem,
established.
Yeah, but if the problem is that those little settlements and whatnot, they are all connected by nice roads, nice infrastructure.
Yeah,
it's all interconnected. You don't.
It's a lattice that they lay on top of the Palestinian land.
It's just like you just go like peacefully, like from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to the settlements, just like la la la, like straight away, no problems. But those, spots on a map, which are the Zone C, this is the legitimate problem. This is the fact that Israel is technically, you see those borders right now. Technically, those borders are borders of another country.
Yeah,
and so they have.
They've fully encroached way past the 49 armistice line, like way past.
So it's like they literally have outposts there that check papers, check what you're bringing in, bringing out, and they say that, we are protecting, we're building the walls, blah blah blah. It's safe now, yeah. Like, they stopped terrorism basically. There were no bombings in Israel after they built up those walls around the zones and West Bank, right?
Yeah.
So it was rather like, it's rather direct. People are coming from there. We're going to close with the walls and have the fucking military police just standing there checking everybody's cars. But if you look at it from like Palestinian perspective, so you have those people who blow up shit, radicals and whatnot, and you have a job somewhere in another town and you have to drive there. Whoops, now you have to wait 5 hours on the border control.
Yeah.
What? Now I don't have a job. What? I'm going into poverty. What?
Not even to mention the fact that many of the just really casual places, like places of worship or like places where your fucking family lives, are cut off to you because of the Israeli Authority.
Yeah, it's really insane. And the problem is that the people who have Israeli passports, like 10% of the Israeli population that is Arab, they don't have to deal with that. Like, because they have citizenship and they live in Israel, right? But they are a minority compared to those people who live in cities that are surrounded by walls and are slowly dying.
Yeah, really. But even the citizens in Israel that are Palestinians are also oppressed. Like, they don't really get, like, if they want to visit their families, it's really difficult. They could have their citizenship revoked. Just tons of terrible things. Terrible things.
Yeah, like, really, like, for example, you can't, the marriage, for example, is still a religious thing.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the sort of, like, at the institutions, like, it's really weird. Like, Israel, no, not Israel, but settling in Palestine in the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, the first Aliyah, all of this stuff, when there was just, it was really a socialist thing. This is what the communists did, like Jewish communists. They went there, they set up fucking communal farms. They were like dreaming of a socialist Zionist thing where Jews will come here, we'll build a nice fucking socialist state right here because
Sort
the
of like
land
a
was
Thomas
completely
More
unused.
utopia sort of thing, but religious.
Yeah, and but the difference being that it actually was working out. Like the cooperative farming is still a very important thing for the for Israel to this day. Yeah, still, despite the fact it was a thing that was started so long ago, but it was supported by the Sogdems that that were in the first days of Israel, and then like this is where the problem starts. This is when the radical right comes in and they're like, hey, let's use that and have imperialism. Let's set up religious rights things. Let's throw people out of the lands. Let's claim particular lands on the basis of religious rights, because like there was a talk about banning.
If you're gonna have a seemingly loose framework for defining imperialism, you might also consider the Jews that went to settle Israel imperialist.
Well, it depends on how
because they were still settlers.
Yeah, technically, like they were buying up land, but but still, they were buying up land from private owners and settling there on this land, setting up agriculture and whatnot. Like we could count it as that, but what I am more trying to show is that what they're doing with the West Bank, because they had agreements, international agreements, which Palestinian authorities were agreeing on, which Jewish authorities and Israeli authorities were agreeing on. Yeah. And then you have this, parts of the conservative right and religious right, which are basically literal like fascists down there, which is still a minority, but still it is appeal. Like it's similar to Hungary, how they have a conservative dude in charge who basically uses.
You might say Poland. Just Britain. Right-wing radicals forming. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Britain, where like basically the.
I don't know about Britain. I don't know about that one.
But like Conservative Party literally used talking points that the radical right, which is like Britain First, used in 2005.
Yeah, like the EDL.
They basically, they basically use the same stuff. So they really appeal to this crowd while trying to make it as mainstream as possible. Basically, those people, they're like, you know what? We should. You know, it was one of the latest things that I've heard from Israel. It's like amazing. They wanted to stop. Referring officially, like have a law put in place to stop referring to West Bank as West Bank and start referring to it as Judea and Samaria.
Oh, wow, that's a good one.
Like, why don't we use the old Bible words to legitimize what we think?
Let's stop calling West Bank West Bank. Let's just start calling it Israel 2. Like, I don't know, like.
It's like Judea and Samaria, and they said those are the hills of our forefathers. This is our like land. This is our land that belongs to us by the right of like because.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think anyone had the pretension that the Israeli state didn't think the West Bank was theirs. It's just that like they were more forthcoming about it in trying to call it by these religious names. Yeah.
So it's really shows you how they basically trying to use, trying to frame, like this is the framing of this conflict when they're like is really important. Like bless you. Isn't
Stop
like
saying that, it's a cough.
Okay. I still want God to bless you. I still want God to bless you. Like there is a question to you. This whole framing thing, language and control over the language. Like in my opinion, we have seen that like throughout centuries is one of the most important thing in oppression. Is the way you frame it. Like take a look at the way, like for example, the birth of the West. Greeks, how they used to refer to themselves and to the others.
Okay, no. So if that's what you're talking about, like maybe these like myths or like values or beliefs that people have, it's not that the language itself is key to the oppression itself. It's key to how, like, the nature of the beliefs that then go on to justify or to condition the oppression, or at least to make the oppressors not feel bad about it. You know, it justifies it, you might say. So
Justification,
like,
basically, yeah.
so like Western civilization, like mythification, like the different language, the way you might frame it, might affect how radically somebody is about oppressing non-Westerners, or it might affect whether or not they do end up oppressing non-Westerners. So if you have a really, really absolute view, or like really mythical view of the West, then you might be more prone to hating people who are outside of the West. Whereas
Right.
if you just have this sort of civic nationalism, like Western civilization has built democracy, then you might not. It's not really as key to a theory or understanding of oppression. That's sort of contingent. It's politically contingent.
Yeah, but like a really interesting fact still I wanted to mention, which I see as a very important thing. If you listen to right-wingers, especially, like, they talk about those justifications that you talked about, right? But let's just say, for example, they have this, let's say alt-right in America, great example. For example, they're saying, you know what, we believe that every single race deserves their own homeland.
Yeah.
This is our core belief. Therefore, we should remove black people from America and let them go to Africa because this is where they belong, and we will have our own thing. Like, if you listen to them, like, if you believe that they are making, it's false what they're saying, because I believe that what they're saying is that they are saying the justification for violence and depression is on the first part, while it is actually just a justification.
I want to be clear. One, I don't think a majority of the alt-right who hold this view think that they are oppressors. I don't think they will be oppressing black people. And I also don't think that they, like, even if they do want to like expatriate all blacks back to like an African homeland,
right?
I also don't think that they would want to do it by violence. Richard Spencer himself talks about the non-violent ethnic cleansing, like peaceful ethnic cleansing. So I don't want to necessarily, at least within the context of talking about the language and the ideas of the alt-right, they don't believe they are oppressors, and they don't believe that they're going to be justifying violence. So it's not a justification for violence. It's if they end up oppressing them somehow, like if they end up wanting to implement some sort of genocidal policy, then this belief that they already have will somehow render it justifiable. That's what the beliefs do.
So you're saying that belief comes first, and then comes violence that the belief will justify.
Yeah. So ideology, I think, is what ideology to a degree, and also like recognition of subjects, like intersubjectivity, I think, is what conditions or perhaps allows the possibility for oppression. So an example of this would be say your ideology is, like, you're an alt-right winger, you're basically a Nazi. Your ideology it interprets the world as such that white civilization, Western civilization, is like some grand beacon, like a Promethean subject of great knowledge and innovation, and that the non-white races are subject to it, and they're merely like bystanders in the great myth of and the great history of the white race. So if there's anything to be desired, if there's anything good about the black people and black civilization or people, it's that they are witness to the greatness of the white man. So it is this ideology that would then, it's the insufficient regard for black people conditioned by this ideology. They don't regard black people as equals to white people. That's one of the things that allows you to oppress them. If you have a sufficient intersubjectivity, and you recognize yourself as you recognize equals to yourself in other people regardless of race, you're at least less subject to oppression. So, I mean, subject to becoming an oppressor. So this is a way in which ideology and these beliefs, these values that they have, interpolate. Interpolate different people of different kinds within their ideology. So, a good example of interpolating somebody as like lesser within an ideology is, and this word interpolation comes from Louis Althusser's theory of ideology. It's so in Christian ideology, God calls out to his subjects, and they know that they are the subjects of God, so they respond. Christian ideology also hails those who perform, let's say, what's a good sin? Coveting your neighbor's ox. Like, so
Yeah,
so the action of coveting your neighbor's ox in and of itself is not like, in the real, there is no like sinfulness about it. That it's Christian ideology that hails or interpolates any person who covets their neighbor's ox as somehow a sinner. And within the framework of Christian ideology, if they are hailed as sinners, if they are identified as sinners, then they are also less than pure subjects. It works the same way with this like Western mythification ideology. You recognize and identify the white man as some pure, transcendental, like beautiful subject, and then black people are not. They are somehow lesser than this. If you have to have that insufficient regard, I think, that insufficient recognition, in order to condition the possibility of becoming an oppressor.
Yeah, basically you need some sort of framework in which there does exist some sort of lesser force and bigger force. Oh,
yeah.
I think I'm echoing a bit. Let me check. No, I'm not. Everything's okay.
So, so what this means is, if a social group, and it has to be a social group, not it can't just be like on an individual basis, and we can talk about that later. But if a social group is oppressed, it has to be because there's something about the social formation in which they exist. It has to be something about that social formation's ideology, its values, and how it regards that social group, and its values and beliefs. It has to be something about that regards them as somehow lesser. There is a insufficient regard. So this could also go to the master-slave dialectic, which I can kind of talk about if you want it. But the Hegelian master-slave dialectic, where the master wants to recognize themselves as superior, and in order to do this, they have to recognize their slave as inferior. But this allows for the master it makes the master not have a sufficient self-consciousness. They're not complete, because they are not recognizing in the other, like, humans. They're not recognizing them sufficiently enough. They're not recognizing them in full as equals, and so they have to recognize the slave as really truly being inferior in order to enslave them. A master would never enslave someone else they regard properly as a master.
Right. It reminds me of this 1/8 of a human thing that was about black people after the.
It's actually 3/5. The 3/5 clause. Yeah. Sorry, compromise. Yeah. That's really spooky. The funny thing about that is that Democrats actually won a lot in the South because they could capitalize on black people as voters, because they counted for 3/5 of a vote, and there were so many of them in the South. Yeah.
Oh god. Yeah, like I don't know. I think more than half of population of Alabama were black people.
Yeah.
And so that was a very major issue for the reactionary fucks after the like they were giving.
They were both reactionary, but I know what you mean.
Right. But like but like, I'm saying, like, those people in the South, like ex-slavers and white, like they were like, oh shit, we have to deal with that.
Southern gentlemen. Yeah,
exactly. The good old Southern gentlemen were like, no, we're not having this. And this is why Jim Crow became a thing. They were afraid of like black senators. Ooh.
Yeah. I don't know if you knew this, but actually, like after when the Civil War was like ending, and there were actually a lot of so when the Union Army occupied the South, they tried to like enforce emancipation, and so they like enforced a bunch of like laws and sort of emancipatory actions that allowed for Black people to actually get elected to positions in government in the South while the Union was occupying them. So I didn't know that before.
Really? I didn't really know about that. I remember about the what's called restoration, or
it kind of got reversed. It kind of got reversed because later on there was this conflict where there was like a really, really close presidential election, and there was like a conflict between these two candidates, and the Republicans, who were like, since they had been leading the emancipation movement, it was the Republicans tried to strike a compromise with the Southern Democrats by saying, we'll pull the Union Army out of the South and stop enforcing these emancipatory claims if you just give us this election, since it's so close and there's no... There was a lot of fraud on both sides and nobody could really tell, and they wanted to have a compromise, and they just said, we'll pull the Union Army out and if you just give us the election.
God.
Yeah, terrible stuff.
Fuck? Like,
depressing.
It's really insane. Like, America, of all places, like, Belarus is such a weird... We're in such a weird spot. Like, we should have far more issues with oppression as we have. Like, compared to other countries. Like, for example, let's say Hungary, good example. They have a really, like, substantial minority of, strong minority of Roma people, right?
Yeah.
And they become basically the basis for radical left there. Like, there are so many political parties who are literally just, parties that, radical left parties whose base their whole policy on emancipation of Roma people. And
I don't think the Hungarians dislike the individual Roma people, though. It's the world Roma.
It's the international Roma people.
The international Roma. Right? Yeah.
Shout out to Attila on Discord. I know that you're not listening to us, but shout out to you anyway. He's the Hungarian Nazi who hangs out occasionally in some service. He's really interesting. He literally used the word Romanian and Roma and Gypsy interchangeable. I love it. It's fun. It's really
Try telling that to a Romanian and you will get shot.
Yeah. So basically, like, Belarus of all places, we do have we do have Roma people, we do have Jewish people, but we exist in such a weird spot where those things don't exist in many ways on the institutional level compared to Americans,
Yeah.
Where you have institutions that are literally designed to oppress people.
Yeah.
But what we do have is a lot of individual oppression and an individual basis. Like, it's when, like, people think that your surname is weird, when they treat you in a weird way, when they find out about your ancestry.
I wouldn't call discrimination or prejudice oppression. I think it's really important to make that distinction.
I wanted to talk about that. I really wanted to talk about, like, the difference between oppression and prejudice, because I believe there is connection between them, but it's really two different things.
So prejudice, different prejudices like sexism, racism, transphobia, etc., form the basis. You might say the ideological basis that we were talking about for oppression. So oppression is you can be prejudiced and not oppress someone. Like, you could have like a really racist government that like nominally doesn't actually, or even functionally in the economy, doesn't actually oppress its people.
Right.
You'd be hard pressed to find that, because most often these prejudices, especially with when it's held by people who are in political power, do infect the institutions that they partake in. So, like, that's only like a hypothetical that probably would never pan out in real life. But that's I think that's a way to think about the distinction. It's that prejudice, like sexism and racism, is the basis, not the actual oppression is the actual action.
Yeah, because really, if you think about it, those prejudices that exist, they're so vulnerable to, like, it's so easy to find them off. Like, I'm not saying it's easy to convince your racist uncle that black people are actually okay. Like, but what I'm implying is that, for example, desegregation of schools in America. like a great example, like how when the process of desegregation of schools was started, the quote unquote forced busing, you know, the nice meme by the. Remember this thing? Do you remember about forced busing?
Yeah.
Like,
Are you
I
trying to
wanted to
say
say,
that? Are you trying to say that desegregation in
yeah,
schooling was effective?
I'm saying when it was actually happening, it actually showed some really good stuff, some really good numbers,
Yeah.
and
No. Yeah.
I believe,
It worked initially,
yeah,
but like when you compare, when you look at the state of schools in like inner cities, the South, like poorer communities, it's still pretty terrible.
yeah, because most of the stuff is finished. I remember, remember reading about this thing, and when they said that they started to basically, white kids started to get education in inner cities, um, money all of a sudden appeared. Wow. It's like white money follows white kids really often, and uh, the interesting, like, why I mention it, like, I'm not, I don't want to discuss this particular policy,
Yeah.
but I wanted to say that a lot of things that are the basis of oppression, a lot of prejudices exist, like, you know, not most, but for my opinion, they exist because of the inability to relate to another group of people. Look at for example, racist, like light racist, you know, people who are like not who start their phrases by saying, you know, I'm not a racist, but,
I'm not
you know,
racist,
those people,
but like, hear me out.
yeah, those people really come out of a completely ignorant place. Like, it's when you live in a mostly white neighborhood, you're brought up among white people, and you have no fucking idea, seen like a couple of black people on TV, you know, in your life. Of
Yeah.
course, it's high. I'm saying, but like, it's really why this sort of, you know, why this sort of prejudice appears. Look at the nice guys.
Yeah.
They're a great
Sockbar,
example.
are you implying Lukashenko has done anything wrong ever?
Done nothing.
Hold Lukashenko
Please,
as thought.
Paul.
I'm a
Nice
real
quotation.
Marxist-Leninist. Yeah. Um.
Just Leninist as well. I
Yeah.
support
So
Lukashenko in
I
his
think you're
struggle against international liberalism.
I think you're
Like,
touching
nice guys. So they
I think you're
show
touching the
a
surface
great
here of
example. Like,
something
why
that
are
I think you're touching the surface here of something that I think is really important. It's like not being able to relate. I talked about this too in like the idea of intersubjectivity and insufficient recognition or insufficient regard. So like that seems
yeah.
like it's like a way to maybe identify, like saying merely not being able to relate. It's like a way of identifying this like really deep thing that permeates societies. And I've got an idea for like a study that you might do on like a sort of, you could call it a genealogy of oppression through like Hegelian and possibly Lacanian. I don't think Lacan applies as much here, but terms, Hegelian terms, where you basically, so let's take the suburban, like 90% white class, like middle class neighborhood, and one guy from that neighborhood moves to Detroit. If he's lived in that suburban middle class all white neighborhood most of his life, he's gonna find Detroit really alien and jarring. It's gonna take some time to adapt. Would you not say? I think that perhaps you might see the life of like really poor downtrodden black folk in Detroit would be, it would seem alien, it would seem other, you wouldn't be able to relate to it in this way. You wouldn't recognize your lifestyle, you wouldn't recognize the kinds of people that you have understood in these people. It would take time. And so I've got an idea. So we can take this and compare it to, let's say, British colonialism. When you have been associating and interacting with primarily white European civilizations for the entire history of your society, no, Detroit is not like a ghost town, Paul Liakhnovich. I don't think, definitely. I mean, there are neighborhoods in it that are pretty fucking garbage and like deserted almost, but I don't think it's a ghost town in general. Anyway, so let's say
It's really,
British imperialism.
it's just, let's say, Yeah, British imperialism, please.
They hadn't discovered, or they hadn't really discovered and interacted with Native Americans until they went and colonized America. When you have interacted with societies that are of a certain technological level, of a certain cultural standard, like within a certain delineated cultural category, Christian, Latin-based, so on and so forth, they have these particular values, and you recognize these different societies as equals somehow. You go to America, you discover a people that not only biologically and like phenotypically looks incredibly different, but their societies and cultures function different, and they're of like a, I don't want to use this term, but like a lower standard. I don't want to say that, but they have less technological development. They use much different tools. They have, like, you haven't seen people, like, they don't even use Native American.
They don't have a concept of property. They don't have a concept of property rights.
That's that, and also even something more basic, as like Native American societies didn't really implement, or like they didn't really incorporate livestock into their agriculture, because it was really
their agriculture was extremely different.
They didn't have like really easily domesticatable cattle. I think it was bison that was the primary livestock. This is from my understanding of, like, these concepts are kind of elucidated.
But like they didn't even like,
and they didn't even have the wheel. They didn't have the wheel.
Yeah, they didn't.
So like when you encounter this way of living, these societies that are so alien, just imagine how alien it must have been, how strange. It's incredibly difficult it's incredibly difficult to see yourself or your society's self in that. You can't recognize yourself in that, and there's a disconnect in intersubjectivity, and this lag time that it takes for up until now recognizing and implementing, or recognizing Native Americans as equal to other white Americans. This lag time is what allows for oppression, because if you don't recognize yourself, or if there's an insufficient recognition, that deficit is the space in which the master-slave dialectic can develop, or just oppression in general can develop. That's where it occurs, I think, because if they did recognize themselves in that society, not only would they physically not be able to, because if they did, then the Native Americans would have guns and equal technology. Not only would they not be able to, they wouldn't be inclined to, because they would see them not as so alien. Like, they would understand and respect them more. And so that develops. There's a lag time between the beginning of British imperialism and today, where, I mean, in a lot of ways, Native Americans still aren't recognized as truly. There's not that full recognition. Like, some people still see Native Americans as kind of alien in like their difference in traditions, practices. That the fact that they actually hold on to these like spiritual practices and whatnot, it's a misrecognition. I mean, when you develop and politically integrate into the political subject of your society, a different category, you can then, instead of recognizing or seeing these weird spiritual traditions and then saying that they're inferior or that they're not the same, instead it becomes a nature of distinguishing between ethnic groups, rather than like a clear subjugation or like a clear alienation of that group. So an example to differentiate, to express this like Hegelian concept of differentiation is, let's say you have a tribe in northeastern Germany that is like, they live, and the only animals they ever encounter are dogs. They've progressed through history, they've only encountered dogs, and suddenly, I don't know, let's say an Egyptian merchant comes up to them, or like they come up to an Egyptian merchant, and they have a cat. So up until now, they've only experienced, for animals, four-legged animals that the only four-legged animals with fur that are easily domesticatable that they've encountered are dogs, and they have these particular traits. But then they suddenly encounter a cat, and not only does you can, upon further examination, recognize the mismatch in characteristics between the cat and the dog. So you recognize that the cat has different ears. So these like misrecognitions, or recognition of like antithesis, you might say, of characteristics in the cat, it gives the cat an aspect of non-dogness because the cat clearly is not a dog. But then it also adds to the dog, it adds to their understanding of the dog the concept of non-catness. You can never have the concept of non-catness in a dog until you recognize what a cat is. And then
so dog is not only a dog, it's a non-cat.
Yes.
So
and then there's
always a thing that it is and it isn't what it isn't. Yeah.
And there's a third thing in this. These two concepts, cat and dog, in their opposition and the non-catness and non-dogness, they become sublated under a greater category because you recognize that there is a category for these objects to belong to, and that category in this case might be pets. So before you didn't have a concept of pets because you couldn't differentiate between a dog and a pet because not all pets are dogs. But for this society, before encountering a cat, all dogs would be pets. So they become sublated. That's I think that might be a good example, a good explanation of the Hegelian dialectic of like contradiction and sublation. But it's like my idea is applying this to recognition between social groups and an insufficient recognition, a social lag time of that recognition is what allows for oppression to take place.
Right. And social Darwinism says in the chat, dog is the thesis, cat is anti-thesis, cat dog is synthesis. Quite
cat
literally.
Dog, dude, I love cat dog. I honestly love cat dog.
I also love cat dog. Me too. And I also was brought up on Nickelodeon.
In reality, actually, if you want to use those terms of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, to take the meme seriously, you would say pet is the synthesis. Because pet is what sublates. Pet sublates the dog and the cat.
Basically.
Yeah.
And we have been talking for some time, and I believe there is one topic that we should cover 100%. Is the way oppression, like we have described what oppression is, what it isn't, and how does it come about? So we recognize.
Actually, we haven't described what oppression is and isn't. The only thing we've said about oppression.
Okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this.
So the only thing we've said about oppression so far, descriptively, is that it isn't racism, or it isn't prejudice. There is a difference. And then we've also said we've expressed my theory of like a sort of genealogy of oppression based on Hegelian terms. Other than that, we might consider what are the necessary and or sufficient conditions of being oppressed. I don't really there's a lot of this in the course that I'm taking on political philosophy right now, but I don't have my notes on me right now. So let's just spitball it. What would you think?
I would like to refer to a great thinker of our time. It's rather modern philosopher, political scientist, John Tron, who referred to being not being oppressed. He said, if you can buy a Big Mac in a drive-thru in McDonald's while wearing a hijab, you're not oppressed.
Yes,
this is what I stand. This is I believe in the immortal science of Marxism, Leninism, John Tronism.
Yeah. So it should be clear from the very outset that is a ridiculous claim.
It is.
The first thing you could even say is what portion of the person's wealth or income is going to that Big Mac? Like for a millionaire, it's like a drop in the bucket. For a really poor person, it's maybe 2% of their weekly income going to that Big Mac, and that is substantial when you consider all the other things to pay. Also, I would use this opportunity to talk about a sort of philosophical concept of truth that is held by Martin Heidegger. So there's this concept of truth that is truth as a clearing. So take a forest, and there's a clearing in the forest. A clearing in the forest allows you to see what is on the ground, what is present in that space. But the very nature of the clearing is that it's a space that delineates between what can be seen in the clearing and what cannot be seen in the beyond the boundaries of the clearing. You explicitly cannot see what is going on in the other parts of the forest. Or you might take a flashlight when it's dark out and you point a flashlight at a spot on the ground. You can see exactly what is on the spot on the ground there. But because you're pointing the flashlight at that spot, You cannot see what is in any other spot. So there's an idea that truth not only is something, when you arrive at some sort of truth, you're not only revealing something, you're hiding everything else outside of that truth. That's what's being expressed here in John Tran's really narrow view of oppression. Like,
Heidegger's analysis.
I don't know why I'm analyzing this deeply. John Tran's conception of oppression being expressed in terms of Big Macs, but you know, so when that's like an example of taking it purely economically. Yeah. Like, oh, as long as you have the money to buy a Big Mac at like a McDonald's, it's like this really nominal view of oppression and viewing it purely through like a consumerist lens. It's like that situation being analyzed for whether or not you're oppressed doesn't take into account any other situation. What if you're an indentured servant and you do have like an income, you're paid very, very little? What if you're an indentured servant? You can go buy a Big Mac at the McDonald's. That doesn't negate the fact that you're an indentured fucking servant.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's just a complete ignorance of any other situation, any other metric by which you might be determined to be oppressed. It's like an even more radical ignorance than the birdcage metaphor if you were to look at one wire. It's like only looking at one section of one wire.
Yeah. Actually, we talked about this before we started the show.
I forgot. I didn't know that we...
so tell the people about it.
So pretty popular in like political science, political theory, and particularly with like oppression theories and stuff about racism and sexism, intersectionality, is there's this writer named Marilyn Frye who wrote an account of oppression, and she compares oppression to as analogous to a birdcage, where if you were to consider the bird the oppressed group or individual, and the birdcage itself the network of barriers which oppress the individual within the cage. If you were to look at each wire, each social institution or barrier individually, then you would see, oh, well, if I have these blinders on and I look just at the wire, there's nothing stopping the bird from going around the wire to the other side. This is also illustrative of that concept of truth I just talked about. You're looking at just one of the social institutions. The necessity of looking at one social institution presupposes some ignorance of other social institutions, unless you take a bird's eye view out on the whole cage. So when you look at the whole cage, you see that there is a network of these systems, of these social institutions or barriers that prevent the bird from flying outside of the cage. Because if the bird tries to fly around one of the wires, it will get stopped by the other wires, and it goes on with all the wires. Now, there are many criticisms to be had of this metaphor. But if you were to distill it and get one thing from it that's really important, it's the concept of the double bind, where you have one social institution. If you try to avoid the barriers or obstacles imposed by that social institution, there's something else in the way. That's the principle of this analogy.
Yeah, it's like, isn't it amazing? Like, sociology is such an amazing science. You can literally have an argument, with a person. And a person that you're arguing with could literally be saying factually correct statements while being wrong overall. It's like they could be saying, you know what, this is bullshit. You can avoid this. This is not like this social institution does not oppress you because you can avoid it. Look, you can buy a Big Mac.
Well, in that case, they're not stating something that's factually correct. It's just factually incorrect from the outset. They're just wrong.
Yeah, but like they could be saying things.
Yeah.
Well,
like so you might say like you can buy a Big Mac in a hijab at a McDonald's. It's like, yes, that is true.
That's true.
But then your conclusion is that you are not oppressed. That's just a non sequitur. The conclusion isn't derived from the premises.
Exactly. And like those arguments with the right wingers, they are amazing. It's like just
the amount of non sequiturs that come out of right wingers and and mere tautologies. My friend Rispy has this funny joke about about what right wingers say. They say that A equals A, thus capitalism. It's like just using tautologies to justify capitalism. It's like reality doesn't justify itself.
Exactly. And it reminds me of like Paul in the chat. It's like Slavik from original co-host of the show, good friend of
Yeah.
mine in real life. And today, like a couple of hours ago, he called me. He occasionally gives me calls, and he's like, "Okay, I was talking to this person, right? And we talked about feminism, and I'm really sad now." Because what the person has been doing, you've been throwing this bullshit non-arguments at me, and I have no fucking idea how to deal with it. Like,
Yeah,
it's
that's always really really painful when I debated an ANCAP one time, and she was just like, her understanding of what like rights are and like from where they're derived, or the fact that you need to derive them from somewhere and what that can be, was, and like economics, was just so out there and so far off the mark that I was just like shocked into silence at like how to respond. I was like, I don't even know where to go from here. And she was like, yeah, you're just not using logic. If you were reasonable, you'd be able to debate me out of my ideology. And I was like, oh my God, stop.
amazing. Yes. It's really painful. It's really painful. It's like the rationals are the ones who sound the most insane. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And really, it's this concept. Like, and why does it happen? Like, because is it the similar thing to what we were saying about like Hegelian thing when like people are not able to relate 100% to another group, and therefore they
Nah,
start to
no, that's
make
not
up
it.
shit.
So in
They
this,
are what's wrong? What's
when
wrong
we're
with them
talking
then?
about reasoning and like and arguing with people, the Hegelian thing doesn't apply here, I don't think. I mean, you might be able to if you were to really think about it in a really roundabout way and a really derivative way, but I don't want to go on that because it just wouldn't be useful, and it wouldn't be. You would
But
end up
like,
talking about something
why?
else.
Like, what
So the
happens?
reason it
What
is,
happens when you start to talk about like my question? So I will reiterate. Why do right-wingers sound so fucking retarded when you talk to them about oppression?
well,
And
the
oppressed
thing you
groups?
might say, immediately is because they're retarded. The thing you might say secondarily is that it's because and this holds with basically all people. People have particular beliefs, values that compose their ideology, and they want to frame things, or they want to frame facts in a way that will justify their beliefs. People are ideological. That it's plain and simple. So the reason that right wingers are like incredibly subject to this, like this idiocy of ideology, is because they think that they're being reasonable, and they think that they're like pushing away all their biases. And if you only provided a good argument, they would believe you. Oh, it's just like such an idiotic view of ideology. It's a non-view. They don't even consider ideology. They don't even consider that they might have subjective biases. So Louis Althusser, in his essay Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses, makes this saying that ideology would never call itself ideological. The only way you can recognize ideology and step outside of ideology, you're still in ideology. You can't step outside of it. Like,
yeah, you can't escape the ideology.
Ideology is eternal, and even when you do escape it, you're still in it. And people who say that they're escaping it are saying it because they are ideological. The ideology never calls itself ideological. This is a perfect example of that, with right wingers saying, "Oh, I'm just being reasonable. Try to debate me." It's like, no, you think you're being so reasonable that your arguments suffer from it because you're purely it's pure ideology. When they do this, it's a good example of ideology never calling itself ideological. They think they're being non-ideological, but they're not.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Soviet Union, to be honest, with the word ideology, and where ideological education was a normal thing. It's really weird how, as you're saying, like, ideology never calls itself ideology. Well, Soviet Union referred to itself and referred to Marxism-Leninism as an ideology. They attempted to look woke about it.
I think,
but despite
I actually would, in comparing these two, I would actually respect the Soviet Union more, because at least they recognize it, and they recognize that they're teaching values that they want people to have. It's just that the only bad thing about it is that you might debate the ideology that they have itself, like in its content, and say, no, these premises or like these theories you have are wrong. Or you might say like, but they at least recognize that they are trying to instill these values or theories or ideology in their citizens.
They were quite open about it. They were quite open about it, but this is where like the immortal science
I think that's better than the right-wingers.
You know?
I think that's better than the right-wingers because they think they're not being ideological. They think they're stepping outside of ideology. I think that I think that having this radically ignorant pretension that you can step outside ideology is incredibly dangerous, and it makes you suffer more than people who recognize. If you recognize that you're in ideology, that's the only way you might be able to be non-ideological. You have to recognize that you're in ideology. It's a sort of paradox, but I think that that's actually good. So I think that if you
I had a similar moment. I had a similar moment in my life when I was like, hey, I got those nice Nike shoes, but now I realize that I got them only because of a consumerist culture and the fact that it is pushed on me by everything.
Yeah.
And whatever, I like it. I like my Nike shoes. Fuck
that's
off.
The most
I'm in ideology.
Honestly. Especially because
that's my way to deal with it.
Especially because ideology and so many other things, like you just said, are subjective and don't really have any objective value or truth to them. Like, I don't have a problem with people making highly ideological or highly presumptuous or highly unreasonable arguments or holding these beliefs, as long as they recognize that they're having these beliefs and that they aren't really based in anything. So, like, for example, with the Soviet Union, if they can at least recognize that their arguments are purely ideological, which they do, if they recognize that it is an ideology, then I'm free to like recognize that and debate them on the content instead.
Yeah, it's like debating with, for example, Jason Rook, who was mentioned in Chan by Barbie. Like, have you guys seen the Global People's War, though? It's like, if you compare, like, let's say a random like Sargon of Akkad, who is just a reasonable human being after all, and Jason, you will be far likely have a discussion, a fucking normal debate with Jason rather than with Sargon. Because Jason recognizes that he is ideological. He recognizes what kind of ideology he follows, and he could still be dogmatic.
Let me add a second qualifier. Okay. You have to recognize that you're ideological, and in order to be respectable, you have to recognize that your ideology is subjective. Jason Unruh and other Maoists elevate their ideology to some transcendental, objective, like higher power. Like Maoists just literally say Maoism is the highest form of Marxism-Leninism. Yeah. They elevate their ideology to some privileged position. So in that respect, I don't know who's worse between Jason Unruh and Sargon of Akkad. I actually don't know. I'm inclined to say Jason Unruh just because like Maoism is closer to me than fucking like radical centrism. But you know,
he's not radical
centrist. Pretty fucking bad.
He's a classical liberal, I think. I think he's classical liberal something.
Oh, Sargon,
But actually, and it's like it really reminds me of it reminds me of again Soviet Union, where they did say it's an ideology. They did say we come from a theoretical basis. This is our theory. This is how we drew our conclusions.
Yeah,
but
they elevate their ideology.
They elevate it, exactly, like, because
Marxism-Leninism is the ideology of the proletariat, and like that claim would only be fine if you could actually like substantiate it. They don't, though. They just say like it is. Like that's where the quote unquote pure ideology comes in, because they elevate their ideology to a privileged position without like it's like. You might say it's a non sequitur. It's a form of a non sequitur because they have this bold claim that's unsubstantiated.
Right. And really, like, in this way, this, we talk about blindness, political blindness, and like this is what I would describe it as, like ideological blindness, where people do stuff without realizing that they come from a particular, how do I say it, from a particular ideological point, from like, this is like a question that was bugging me today. I was thinking, like, if left wing has like literal fucking books written about ideology, liberals have literal fucking books written on liberalism, like philosophy. So much fucking shit has been done in theory and practice of liberalism and republicanism, with all this stuff. And it's like, wait a fucking second.
Hold on. First, Democrats and Republicans being like ideologically.
I'm not talking about Democrats. I'm not talking about Democrats.
Republicanism.
I said republicanism as an idea of republicanism, as the French Revolution, republics, nation states.
Yeah, but
this sort of
that's
stuff.
not really.
I'm talking about
republicanism itself isn't really an ideology. Like Soviets, you might say, were Republicans in that sense.
Yeah, but like what I'm saying, I'm trying to say is that you have this thing, like, and I'm like, where the fuck does the right comes in? Like, because in many ways, for example, Democratic Party represents liberalism, right?
Both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are
liberal, but the Republican Party is more of a liberal reactionaries or something, because like
Republicans are
Republicans, yeah, they're like liberal reactionaries, like
because they're.
How do you make this leap from liberty, equality, brotherhood?
So the reason that is I think is because conservatism as such is politically relative. The conservatism as it was in its genesis with like people like fucking what's his name? Was it Edmund Burke? I think Edmund Burke. The conservatism of Edmund Burke is radically different from the conservatism of American politicians. Edmund Burke wanted an aristocratic class that oversaw society and instilled virtue in it, while American Republicans and conservatives hold to very traditional American concepts of freedom, which are rooted in classical liberalism. So conservatism is relative because it has an object, an ideological object, which it wants to conserve. So for Edmund Burke, it was like a concept of aristocratic society. And for American conservatives, it's this traditional view of American liberty and American classical liberalism. That's what makes them classical liberals. It's because they're conserving a very particular form of classical liberalism.
Right. So as
such, that's what makes like conservatives not necessarily juxtaposed to liberals ideologically, and what makes the Republican Party not necessarily juxtaposed to liberalism ideologically. It's because they both have the same ideological roots.
Yeah, I get it. And with basically oppression being so balls deep in ideology, so, and the people who participate in oppressive institutions as well, being so balls deep in them, right? What is the way?
I would be hesitant to draw any claims from the statement you just made, because it's basically a tautology. Everyone is balls deep as such in ideology.
Yeah. Like, how do we approach oppression from that is using ideology to legitimize itself?
Yeah, see, that's why I mentioned it being a tautology, because there's nothing unique about approaching the question of oppression as relates to the question of ideology. It's mere tautology. Like ideology permeates everything. So to claim that ideology has a unique relevance to oppression is I don't think that's necessarily true. Ideology has no unique relevance to anything, and if it does have a unique relevance to anything, I don't think it's oppression, because more of the basis of oppression, I think, comes from this sort of intersubjectivity, misrecognition in these Hegelian terms that I described before. I think that's the primary thing in the genealogy of oppression. You might say ideology has a big role in oppression as it occurs, but I just think that
Yeah, I do understand. But like, my question is to simplify it to to the basis. How do we solve solve oppression in 21st century?
Sorry, Dubois, you're a college undergrad. How do we solve Africa?
This is a very stupid question. It's a very stupid question because it is so like solve the world. But like, what do you think?
So the first question is theorizing. You have to theorize on oppression in order to determine what institutions or what individuals even, or I mean, that's a false dichotomy, I think. But what do we define as oppressive? Who do we define as oppressed? So that's what you have to find out first.
Uh-huh.
Black people, clearly oppressed. Now we have to define which institutions in society are oppressing them. Like, what are oppressive institutions, or rather, what are oppressive aspects of the social formation of America? I'm hesitant to use the word institution because there's this like sort of individualist juxtaposed against institutionalist view that I think is a false dichotomy that lends itself towards calling all white people racist. I don't like that. That's another issue, but yeah. So you have to.
We talked about it on Discord, like we were
Yeah,
discussing.
yeah. I actually remember that.
Like, it's not really racism, despite the fact that like blah blah blah.
Oh
like,
yeah, I do remember talking with you about this like Garcia paper, like stuff like that.
Yeah, Garcia paper. Yeah.
So yeah, you do have to you have to find out what's oppressing in order to get rid of it. So yeah, I mean that's the first step. Where would we go from there? I guess you might take it into, politics. You take it into the sphere of politics. You have to find out your target. You have to find out what you want to do, and then you take it into the political sphere.
Exactly. And
although actually,
it
wouldn't just be the political sphere itself. You have to combat, like you have to perform political or ideological combat. I think in all spheres of social formation. Of social formation. So, for example, you might fight to better integrate or better promote diversity, or not necessarily diversity quotas, but like just measures in order to get Black and white students more integrated with each other, and like more like there's not like. So that you don't have this idea of like, oh, that's a Black school. There's a lot of Black kids there. Like that is something that you don't want people saying or understanding. There should be no need to identify a school as a Black school.
Yeah, I get it. So basically,
that's one of the goals. And
stop supporting those things. Stop supporting those, differentiating between.
So
groups.
It's not. I don't think it's actually going back to this sort of like insufficient regard that I mentioned before. I don't think it's actually a problem of active support. I don't think anyone, or at least to a large degree, I don't think most of the oppression that occurs in America is actively supported. I think it's merely a neglect. So a lot of people would like to
merely want
a neglect. A lot of people would say that Black people in America are oppressed. There are all these institutions that actively oppress them. I don't think that's as much the case. You might take it on an institution by institution basis, but I think the problem is that when you look at the civil rights movements of the 60s, you had LBJ and the Civil Rights Act, and then the Voting Rights Act, but even the Emancipation Proclamation that freed Blacks from slavery. When you free Black people from slavery, consider the socioeconomic status and social position of a slave. It's not enough merely to say they are no longer slaves. You have to take measures to raise them to the same level as white Americans. I don't think there have been any measures in order to do that. Same with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, getting Black people allowed to go into schools or allowed to vote. You have to consider why they might, like, they're allowed to go into schools, but they tend not to be, they tend to coalesce in these inner city communities that have really shitty schools. So it's like, it's not enough to say they're allowed to go to other schools, or we're not forcing them not to be with white people.
It creates this false vision. It's like, which capitalists push, like pro-capitalist people push a lot. They say like, wait a second, are there any direct obstacles for them not to do something?
Yeah, it's a problem of like a really superficial de jure oppression analysis where they say, oh, I mean, they nominally have these rights. It's like, yeah, but that's not enough.
Exactly.
And so what I think has happened is that since the Emancipation Proclamation, no measures have really been taken that much to elevate or to pull I think that Black people have been left in a gutter. They've been left in this gutter for too long. No measures have been sufficient to pull them out of that gutter. They're still in that gutter. They're still inner cities. They're still rotting in those inner cities. There's still violence. There's still economic squalor. nothing has solved this. Voting rights didn't solve it. Fucking Emancipation Proclamation didn't solve it. I mean, obviously, you can't just like take the chains off a slave and say you're free, go wild without any money. Like they're not going to do anything. So,
well, you say that, but may I remind you about Hungarian Revolution of 1919 and how the means of production were seized?
Yeah.
Balakun literally wrote on a piece of paper to seize the means, and they were seized.
Okay.
That's it.
What about it? Oh, they just wrote on a piece of paper that the means were seized, and they weren't.
Yeah, they just put in law that banned private property, and that was it. They just gave up voluntarily.
Yeah. I think that's a different situation. I wouldn't make an equivalency here, but I guess that just expresses the principle of like nominal versus real.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
I just want to mention that, you know, in contrast with how you said, like, it's not enough to just say, yep, here you go, see you later, you're now free to be an equal citizen in every single regard without us doing anything.
Yeah.
Just writing a piece of paper that you are. It's like, really, this is what, in many ways, like, this is what we see all the time with the right wing. I love when you said what de jure. Like, this is exactly, they see it from the jure perspective. And when you point out, for example, like, they say, you know what? Black people and white people are equal in every single regard. They're all equal above the law, under the law, right?
Yeah,
and then you point to police brutality, and like, look, laws are not enforced.
There's no paper saying police should shoot black people. They're free.
Exactly. Like, exactly. It's like, this is actually, like, black people kill each other more than the police.
This is primarily a political philosophical problem that has been debated against libertarians who hold this really superficial de jure view. This is the problem of negative freedoms as opposed to positive freedoms. Negative being freedom from, and positive being freedom to. John Rawls argues against. John Rawls and Nozick have this sort of political philosophical engagement about that. But I want to go further than that to in sort of like a full combat neoliberalism way and say that a lot of the sort of like social justice movements today, like sort of diversity quotas or like or some of the stuff that's more superficial, supported by Black Lives Matter, I think some of this doesn't go far enough either. So I think that and in a way you might say that, I just had an idea. You might say that the reason that these don't go far enough is because these people in these like sort of social justice or like intersectionalist movements are steeped in the elements or outgrowths of liberal or like bourgeois ideology. And so if they were to really go far enough in order to liberate black people from oppression, it would maybe not eliminate, but destabilize the conditions by which bourgeois and like liberal ideology can be sustained. So it's their ideology that limits themselves from real liberating measures, from real abolition of oppression, and that's why you get more superficial measures.
Right, and
so that's my combat neoliberalism take on like Lee intersectionality theory stuff.
It reminds me of a speech, like a piece of the speech that by Fred Hampton, what he has been talking about in his time. He said that it doesn't make sense to fight against racism using black racism. It doesn't make sense to fight against the system using the system's own
yes,
instruments.
The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house, as the famous quote goes.
Exactly, and he said, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense to fight like economic oppression with black capitalism. You have to fight it with socialism. You have to step beyond the bourgeois ideology. Basically, it's what he was talking about.
Yeah, I think that idea is good, but it gets abused a lot by tankies, you know, like sort of like uphold unruist thought, like sort of like, oh, you fucking triggered SJW feminists. It's like, okay, you can't just call everyone you disagree with an SJW in the same way that some people say you can't call everyone you disagree with a Nazi. It's like, no, that's not how it works, because I think there are really good or just really good ideas about oppression that can be studied. But I think that when it passes over into bad ideas is when you get into the domain of like intersectionality. I don't like intersectionality. I think that you might talk about this and how it and how you might fight it with socialism instead. You might relate this back to that idea of truth, where whereas these like intersectional groups that focus on their individual groups' oppressions, they are focusing so hard on the individual groups that they are part of or sponsors oppression that they completely miss out on the truth of the whole system. So, ironically, you might say that because they focus so hard on the intersections of different groups' oppression, they actually miss out on the greater birdcage, you might say.
Right, right. Oh my God. Ideology is unescapable.
Yeah.
The end is nigh, and a person in the chat is complaining about there is no black person talking about oppression where to white people. A white person and a Slav with a last, as he's referring to me. I am a Slav talking about black folk without black person in the conversation.
If you want to have educated opinions and like, okay, so how are we to understand? Let's say before black people were able to like really get into education, get educated. How do you suppose anyone is to be educated about black oppression? Do you think that black people will just autodidactically in their really shitty neighborhoods with terrible education and facilities? Do you think they're just going to teach themselves about real theories of oppression? It's like they can't. I don't like this meme about like only the lived experience is sufficient to build the knowledge of oppression. It's like no, you can't just build it purely on lived experience and feelings. You have to actually understand the thing that you're talking about. And it's not enough just to say that by nature, by virtue of being black, you have some sort of access to a higher truth about blackness and being black and oppression. It's like, yeah, no. Like, not every black person can be France fucking Fanon, dude.
Yeah, and also another thing, it's really not about like you're saying you're reaching. No, I would agree with you, Dooboys, but I would like to also point out that talking like it's really more about being able to discuss topics using like you can theorize about stuff. There are people who are literally have let's have a non-issue thing. Let's have for example Christianity, right? Christianity and theology. For example, you can have a Christian person, right? And you can have, for example, this person who goes to church every Sunday in this evangelical little thing in America, right? And you can have a person who is not a Christian, but who has a degree in theology. And who will be better to talk about Christianity? A person who lives as a Christian or a person who has an education in Christianity?
It's a false equivalency because you're not talking about the oppression of Christians.
If we talk about... Yeah, but like I'm saying that you are able to talk about subjects without being a person with whom the subject is about. Like, I still understand the lived experiences of people, but I think neither of those deserve to be the only one.
Yeah,
this is the ultimate source.
This is another thing I fucking hate about like intersectionalists, like college kids. They develop this idea of like lived experience taking primacy over everything else, and that like everyone who lives within the social group has some sort of access to a transcendental truth about the thing that if you aren't in the group, you don't. It leads to a really, really bad like anti-intellectualism. I'm against anti-intellectualism of all sorts, and this is one of the worst that I've ever seen. It's really bad.
Yeah.
That's what this like sort of lived experience meme gets you.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we go? Because we've been
not really
for some time.
Not really.
All right, but I think we had some fun. We had a fun discussion. It was really fun talking to you.
I agree.
And it was really interesting. We have some really interesting thoughts. I really liked the analysis.
Yeah.
Of this. It's really cool.
It's very illuminating.
Yeah,
it helps me get my thoughts together too.
On this note, I'd like to say thank you to the chat. It was fun to have you here. I'd like to say, before we go, I wanted to Oh, my cat fell down. I'm sorry.
Oh my god, I heard that. Jesus.
Oh my god. It was not only a cat, it was also a bottle of juice. So
Okay.
it was mostly juice bottle. Oh my god. Are you okay? He was sleeping and he was stretching while being on the table. Are you alright, cat? His name is Carl. Oh my god. Yeah, he's chill. He didn't even woke up yet. Oh my god. You spooked the living shit out of me, cat. I was doing a fucking outro. And you just do it like that. Do you have any respect for fucking thing that I'm doing? You know?
He's oppressing you.
He's oppressing me. He doesn't respect me. He doesn't
Yeah.
he's alright. So yeah, as I was saying, I wanted to quickly respond to a thing. Like earlier today, there was a stream that I wanted to appear on an evening with comrades today, but I
is this throwing shade now?
No, I always slept. I slept. And there was a thing. I woke up 1 hour after it all finished. And I was like, "Fuck, I missed it." And there was one very cool thing they talked about Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yes. Cristal 1290 man.
Exactly, and how he said that. Oh, those fucking Aboriginals of Australia. They didn't even develop. They didn't even like. Develop a fucking wheel. Why should we respect?
Mama. Oh god.
Why should we respect their ugly art? So they are so inferior. And I'm like,
he actually.
Do you know that white people? He did say that. He did say that they didn't develop wheels, so we should respect their art. And I'm like, wait a second. So we should only respect the fucking nomadic tribes of Eurasia then? The ones who originally developed the fucking
well,
wheel?
No, that's not the principle of the thing, but like it's still terrible. Like fuck.
But like if we put it far enough, like look at it. Like I think that fucking Hanani people that live in the fucking Hanan, they should suck a dick, the horse people, because if it wasn't for the fucking Proto-Mongolians and the fucking Kumanians and fucking they are the ones who should be ruling over us. They are the ones who should be fucking they have the supremacy over all the fucking people. I come from a family. My grandfather is a
tyrannic nationalist. Are you a pan-tyrannist?
I'm not a tyrannic nationalist. I'm not a tyrannist, but I'm not a tyrannist, but but
like
my grandfather is a Tatar. He's from Tatarstan.
Oh, I see.
I'm directly descendant from the people who are related to the fucking Genghis Khan. I mean,
so is everybody.
Based on maths, I am technically a fucking related to him rather directly.
That, like, you know that like at least 80% of Europe is related to Charlemagne, right?
100% of Europe is related to Charlemagne. I am related to the fucking conqueror of the fucking
accepts the ridiculousness of the claim and then goes on to make the ridiculous claim.
And the people who literally invented a wheel. So Milo, step aside.
I mean, Milo
the fucking nomads are coming.
Who made the wheel though, too?
He's not. Oh, fucking hell! Like, and it doesn't work like this. We should respect. It's like the video I've seen about this dude fucking saying, "Oh, we are Anglo-Saxons. We are one people."
I know what Milo said is terrible, but your meme is going off of why it's terrible.
No, you don't understand. That's my ancestry.
Terrible. Jesus, that is a horrible thing to say. Why would it's like when somebody reads the introduction to Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel and is like, you know what? Heil Hitler. Like, what? That's not... Yeah. Where do you get that from?
I love it. And also, like, there was one dude...
Darren, I know what Milo does. I know it's epic trolling, but he's also a crypto-fascist.
He's like, trolling should be smart. It's not, haha, triggered liptards.
No, he's just being a dick. He's just having
a dick. Being a dick does not account for trolling.
Even if it is just trolling, I think it's merely like if it's exaggeration, it's exaggeration of his actual views.
Yeah, basically, it's like what is this satire?
Fucking
it's satire of myself.
Not even Sargon was that much of a dick. He made a video on Guns, Germs, and Steel, and he wasn't that much of a dick. He was pretty chill about it. Like, come on.
So yeah, I wanted to say one quick thing before we go away. I've seen this video of a dude who said, like, oh, there are some people who in Britain who say that we're not Anglo-Saxons, but actually we are. And he's like starts to prove that English people are Anglo-Saxons, and I'm like, wait a fucking second. Shouldn't it be obvious? Like, what are you trying to imply here?
Yeah, like who
Then
would say that they are?
he used this idea that we are actually all that Anglo-Saxons was a thing, and but actually, not only it was a real fucking like number of tribes, but also we should use this as a basis for us Anglo-Saxon people to bind together.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
let's peak reaction. Let's just we're descended from I mean, like, I'm technically descended from Genghis Khan. I'm gonna go start a nomadic horde and roam the steppes of eastern Washington.
Exactly. This is like, this has the same amount of logic as this, weird fucking, we used to be one tribe, therefore I will use my blood relevance and DNA as a basis for a society, despite the fact that blood didn't make Anglo-Saxons Anglo-Saxon, was the culture, language, the common history, and all of that stuff, fucking group identity.
I just want to point out real quick, Dynamic Darren in the chat, who's been talking about black folk being talked about by non-black folk, and now he's saying Milo is just an attention whore. Don't pearl clutch, as if I'm pearl clutching. Darren, when Nazis go out in the streets of Charlottesville and lynch a black person, I guess it's just for attention, huh? I mean, they are just doing it for attention. Don't pearl clutch, okay? Just keep that in mind.
Just doing it for attention.
Yeah, dude.
It's like
they're just trolling, dude. They're just trolling.
Oh my god! It's
I mean,
like,
the Ku Klux
there is
Klan
a difference
weren't really
between
doing it for
Milo.
attention when they burn crosses in people's lawns. I'm not even fucking kidding.
It's just literally for attention. Yeah, it's just for attention. Shut up.
Don't
like,
pearl
it's not
clutch
a
black
fucking
people.
argument.
Fucking God, you guys are such liberal whiners.
Liberal fucking whiners. On this note, let's say bye-bye to people. It was fun talking to you. I'd love to have you again on the show.
Yeah, it was great.
People tune in this weekend on Radio Silence Podcast. We didn't have a Radio Silence Podcast last week for a reason that we're doing a rebranding, and we may or may not had a lot of technical difficulties and lost half of the audio. But we will have a very interesting discussion with TK Jones on the topic of social media and the way social media, like the way it exists in a sort of weird place where it's one of the foundations of how we function today as social animals. Like, we can't just sit on the internet without being on social media. We are using social media right now to communicate this, but at the same time, it is explicitly designed to socially engineer itself into our lives, and how, like, all those things, though, like Facebook is listening in on you, all this stuff, we'll have a bunch of interesting stuff to talk about social media and why it is important and what may come about with it. This Saturday, it will be around morning, European morning, on our Discord. We'll record this. We will be recording this live as always on Discord, and you can tune in, and we do announcements before we start, so please join our Discord. We have all the fun discussions there.
I'm gonna let you finish, but I got two great ideas for that discussion you just mentioned. Gotta say 'em. You could think about social media and how it's a response of the market to a young generation that wants to express itself all the time.
Yeah.
And also, I just had a thought today about people before, like, development of technology and consumerism walked around in their daily lives in silence, and now young people walk around listening to something almost constantly. You can think about that and how it affects people's lives too.
Yeah. We literally exist in a information overload, like 24/7. It's really crazy. Club Penguin, don't forget to.
Oh, we gotta have an EML Minecraft Let's Play, dude.
We should have an email Minecraft.
Unironically, I'm not even kidding.
I will think about it. I can make it happen.
Okay.
We should.
It was good talking to you.
All right, people. It was fun talking to you. It was so long.
Bye.
Okay, so see you people. Bye bye.